We are in some very exciting times. A month ago, we had our annual Cloudscape event where the panelists were all up on stage presenting their viewpoints and perspectives on T-Mobile connectivity, Windows 11, and AI. Today, we have the opportunity to bring them together, share their thoughts collaboratively. Not only are we disrupting the operating system, security is reinventing itself with zero trust architecture. We have the introduction of AI-enabled endpoint compute and the confluence of these three things together. Vectors of pushing technology means that we have to reimagine how we think about basic things, like how do we connect to work and what resources are we going to need? As the workplace changes and we are more dynamic, cellular is enabling this with the Windows 11 and cloud-based services. Accessing these types of services are critical. Joining me today is Carl Conley, CTO and CMO of CellHub Enterprise, Josh Morgenthau, Microsoft Practice Manager here at Blue Mantis, and of course, John Treadway, founder and CEO of AI Technology Partners. My first question is going to go to Carl. Carl, can you start by explaining what 5G is and how it is different from 4G?
Sure, Rob. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here. Yeah, this is a question that comes up quite a lot. And arguably, a lot of the people on this call are probably using 5G, but not very aware of some of the differences. So I'm really glad to have the opportunity to explain what they are. And more importantly, why 5G is really, in my opinion, an enterprise platform. I'll start with the basics. First and foremost, 5G, unlike the other Gs, is actually made up of three very distinct bands of spectrum. Now, when you subscribe to a 5G service, you won't probably notice this, but it's important to differentiate the differences. The first band is what's called low band, and low band is, from a performance perspective, very similar to 4G, but it's certainly under the 5G umbrella, and that becomes important, and I'll explain in a few minutes why. The second band is between 1 and 7 gigahertz, and this is called the mid band. And the mid band is what most of the analysts would describe as the innovation band, because from a characteristic perspective, it has the right set of capacity, coverage, and capability that is really well suited to enterprise. And then, Rob, there's another band that's called the millimeter wave, and it's called a millimeter wave because structurally the spectrum crests are a millimeter apart. And what millimeter wave affords those who subscribe to it is really low latency and incredible capacity. But most of the carriers offer all of those bands under the umbrella of their 5G service. That's the first difference, the distinct bands of spectrum. I would say the second big difference is the architecture. So in the old days, everything 4G and before, the ecosystem, Rob, was very much a locked system. That is to say that if you were employing a 5G network, you would go to the major OEMs and they would dictate essentially the kind of capabilities that your cellular network would deliver. Now, with 5G, the standard, and by the way, the standard is dictated by a kind of consortium called the 3GPP. And the 3GPP basically define what goes into every release of the Gs. So in 5G, there's two basic ways that a carrier would deploy or employ 5G. The first is what's called non-standalone. And as that name implies, it means that the 5G is reliant on something else. So some of the carriers in the US are on non-standalone, and this becomes very important in a couple of minutes, and I'll explain why. Non-standalone basically means that you have 5G radios and you have 5G spectrum, but your core are the services that you're leveraging to deliver the 5G network are very much 4G. So it's kind of 1 foot in the 5G world and 1 foot in the 4G world. There's an alternative to that, which T-Mobile actually have employed when they offered 5G in the US, and that's called standalone. So from an architectural perspective, very different from 4G in the sense that it doesn't rely on anything that's come before. So when T-Mobile employed 5G, they architected their 5G architecture from the ground up in what's called standalone because it's not reliant on 4G. So that means its core is a distributed software core. And that's very important because if you're on a 5G standalone core, it means that as the 3GPP releases new features and functions, and they do because 5G is very much a software-defined construct, you can take advantage of those capabilities. So you have a 5G core, software-defined core, you have 5G radios, and you have the 5G spectrum. So when you put those together, 5G is very different from the other Gs. And I will say that, what does that mean from a consumer perspective? Because you're obviously not involved in the architecture. It means that if you're on a 5G standalone or 5G network, you can get much better speed, right? So 5G theoretical speeds are about 10 gigabits a second, incredibly fast. Whereas in the 4G world, you're looking at maybe 100 megabits per second. So if you're an enterprise user and you're employing 5G, it means that you have now speed that can keep up with modern digitalization. So for example, we're oftentimes involved a lot in conversations with manufacturing. And manufacturing is going through massive waves of digitalization, and therefore they need speed in a network to keep up. The other attribute of 5G, of course, which is very different from 4G, is the latency. And latency, as you probably know, is the speed at which it takes to issue a command and get a response back. So in the 4G
I
world, huh?
I love that you just brought up latency. Finish
Okay,
your say. You finish
yeah,
what you're saying, and then I have a question for Josh.
okay. Well, so latency obviously is very important today. As we see more digitalization, more machine-to-machine communication, you're going to need a network that can send a signal and get a signal back very, very quickly. And in the 5G world, the standard calls for a 1 millisecond latency. So that's obviously the blink of an eye. And what that means, Rob, is we're now seeing enterprises employ the differences in 5G versus 4G to take advantage of those to do some very interesting things in terms of connectivity, in modernizing and employing digitalization, and having a network that can actually keep up.
Got it. So we're talking about latency. Josh, how is Blue Mantis helping customers leverage this technology or these technology advancements in the Windows 11 environment?
Yeah, Rob, I think there's two pieces here, right? There's sort of a tactical, technical, and then there's a strategy change. As Carl mentioned, right, these advancements in bandwidth and latency, they're opening up 5G as a means of access to things like VDI, cloud PCs. In my Microsoft world, right, that's heavily looking at Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. It's opening up, remote anywhere work for a new group of employees that hadn't previously been accessible. And so that's the tactical, right? The bits and bytes of what's possible there. I think from Blue Mantis perspective, right, we're really trying to create awareness that the way businesses think about their endpoint hardware has fundamentally changed, right? For years and years, really all you needed to know was screen size. Do they need a 10 key? What are my CPU and RAM requirements? Maybe there's some organizations still wrestling with spinning disks versus SSDs, but for the most part, commodity hardware. And so, if you were at our Cloudscape event last month, this is not new messaging, right? What we're really trying to help customers understand is, there are implications to their next endpoint hardware purchase in terms of things like on-device AI, NPUs for being able to run those local AI instances, ubiquitous connectivity with 5G, and how that then impacts security, how that extends cloud-based AI like Copilot, and ultimately, right, how all of these things are going to impact both the tactics and the strategy of the business. And all of that is even before we start talking about, specifically the Windows 11 changes, the new features and capabilities that are introduced there, hardware-based security of identities and authentication, something that's more secure than traditional passwords, something that doesn't require admins to build and test policies. So first and foremost, we're trying to create that awareness that the choices you're going to make with hardware, they're going to impact the next 3 to 5 years of your business, making the right choices to think about AI, to think about 5G connectivity, and then not commit yourself to another 3 to 5 years sort of an antiquated experience because all of these vectors are pushing us very rapidly to a different future than we were at, even 12 months ago.
Got it. All right, John, I'm going to tee you up in a second here, but before I get there, Carl, how does T-Mobile's 5G strategy stand out in the market?
Great question. So CellHub is a primary agent. I should explain that. That means that we help partners like Blue Mantis engage with T-Mobile. We're exclusive with T-Mobile. So we help Blue Mantis understand programs, what the differentiators are between T-Mobile and the other carriers. So let me get onto that. The way I typically explain it, Rob, is in these three buckets. First and foremost, as we just talked about, the spectrum is incredibly important when you're looking at a 5G offering. And all the carriers have the low band, the mid band, and the high band, but it's the proportion of those bands that becomes very important, specifically for the enterprise, for this very reason. I mentioned the attributes of the mid band. It's a great 5G spectrum in the sense that it can give you capacity, it can give you coverage, but it also has the structure such that it can go through buildings, which becomes very important because that was one of the limitations with certain bands of spectrum. So T-Mobile, when they acquired Sprint a couple of years ago, acquired massive holdings of that mid-band or C-band spectrum. And that's very important when you're considering which carrier to employ, because you want to have not only the spectrum, but the right characteristics in the spectrum. So first and foremost, T-Mobile has the most mid-band spectrum than all of the other carriers combined. And that becomes very important when you're making your decision, obviously. The other attribute that I would argue is very important in terms of selection is T-Mobile has presence on about 80,000 towers in the US. So that means, Rob, from a coverage perspective, they can cover 98% of the US population with 5G. So in most parts of the country, you'll be covered with 5G. And that's obviously important when you're making a decision, specifically if you've got mobile employees. You want to make sure that there's obviously coverage. I think the last thing, Rob, though, and we kind of touched on this on the intro, was the architecture choice. So because T-Mobile have that standalone architecture built from the ground up, they can offer enterprises some very unique things that the other carriers quite aren't there yet. And by interesting things, one of the things that 5G standalone enables T-Mobile to offer is what's called a network slice. And you'll see recent announcements about T-Mobile Priority, for example. This is a real game changer for those organizations that are in public sector or mission critical, such as first responders, right? They can literally, T-Mobile's carved out a specific virtual network for that class of user. The user has a device with a specific SIM, and that SIM knows that it takes advantage of that particular slice. And that means they get preemption, they get priority, but also when the network's saturated, the network is intelligent enough to be able to move them around to that particular slice, and that slice has very specific attributes. We're starting to see this too in commercial applications, such as in the healthcare space, where healthcare, let's say a hospital, has a very specific requirement around bandwidth, reliability, coverage, and capacity. And they can literally engage with T-Mobile and basically define the attributes that they need specifically in the network, and T-Mobile can do that. So that's a real differentiator, Rob. And the other carriers at the moment, they haven't employed a full standalone network, so they can't take advantage of those software features. I'll just close by saying one more thing. If you look at the news, T-Mobile's making some exciting announcements. And because of that standalone software-defined core, they're engaging with the likes of NVIDIA and Starlink to do some interesting things. So the next release of 5G enables 5G to be connected to and signals sent and received from satellite. So they have an agreement with Starlink whereby they can provide 5G services over satellite. And that's great because in those areas that they don't cover, they can now basically provide coverage to perhaps rural communities who are heretofore basically isolated. And another huge announcement is a relationship with NVIDIA. So because they have a software-defined architecture, they can now use AI and machine learning provided by NVIDIA GPU to essentially observe the network, look at anomalies or look at need, and then make network decisions and changes such that the consumer always gets the best possible connectivity. And that's just not possible from the other carriers at the moment. So lots of great innovation happening in that space just because of the architectural choice, the spectrum, and the coverage.
I do like the architectural choice and the fact that it's a software-defined network, like a full-blown software-defined network. To me, that allows for a couple things, right? One, uh, ongoing security and protection, but also with the slicing, for example, that you were talking about, the ability for, from a compliance standpoint, to say, hey, we're going to dedicate this slice to this part of the operation and this slice over here to another part of the operation, ideally keeping them separate where they might not need to mix. John, you and your team have been out there for a while. You're doing a ton of work, working on a bunch of projects. We've had a chance to work together a little bit, and I know you're doing a bunch of work here as well. From an AI perspective, how can Blue Mantis customers capitalize on the 5G capabilities Carl was talking about to enhance their AI initiatives? What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so think about this, and I think that kind of pulling the technical side back for a little bit, let's think about kind of why this all matters, right? And what can we do from a, what can a business achieve by combining the combination of 5G connectivity and the speed and the low latency that comes with that, and even eventually you're doing that from a satellite, so you can kind of connect to that anywhere, with the capabilities that's happening in the PC infrastructure on the client side, with the NPUs and the GPUs on board, and localized AI, and then of course everything that's going on in AI that we know about from on the kind of cloud side, if you will, things that are running in large scale data center environments, doing basically intelligence on demand, right? So put all that together, right? Individually, they're interesting for their own purposes, but when you start to combine that, right, into a what can I do when I have all of those things, it starts to open up some really interesting doors. So I think we had Carl talking about, like, even like in a hospital or a medical environment, right, or particularly out in the field. If I'm out in the field with an ambulance and EMTs and all of that, where could I apply? And maybe, healthcare and medical decision making isn't the right use case right now for generative AI, but let's just think about where can I apply in the field a combination of what I'll call a hybrid cloud and edge AI infrastructure, and if I want to do that, why is it important that I have that kind of low latency and high speed connectivity, right? So if I have the ability to run smaller models on my laptop with all of the technology that's going into the laptops now and the capability that's showing up in the operating system, then, or in my phone, right? Then I can get kind of immediate access. And if I don't have a connection for whatever reason, I'm not cut off from some level of intelligence that I can get access to. But the intelligence you can run on your local device is going to be constrained because it's not going to do the stuff like if I use the latest version of OpenAI's models, which is called O1, or not 01, but O1. And that O1 model has a new capability that we've never seen before, right? We've seen ChatGPT, but now we have a new thing called reasoning, where it takes a long time to answer because it thinks through all the implications and step by step. Well, there's not enough GPU horsepower in a single GPU or a little GPU cluster that you might have on your laptop. There's just not enough. So if you want kind of a more advanced experience, you have to think about what are the things I can do on the local device, and what are the things I need access to kind of centralized, high performance, high power capability. And that's all great. You have that. Now, what I need that to be always available to me. I need to be able to ask the local model, to do something, and it to say, well, this is beyond my capability, so I need to go out to the cloud-based environment and return back, whatever it is that the AI is supposed to be doing for you. And I need to do that really, really fast. And I need to have that from an experience perspective be very seamless for the users, for the business users. So it's that combination, one thing you add it up, it's kind of like how we got here, right? It's CPUs and silicon, and then GPUs with gaming, and then the internet and connectivity and, you know, hyperscale data centers and all of that. You pull it all out together, and that's where, and also advancements in kind of computing algorithms and architectures. And now that's why we have AI that we have today, and it's just going faster and faster. Now, but we also have, like, even the big guys that are saying, hey, I have large scale, large language models, LLMs. I also have small language models, you know, SLMs. And SLMs are what I'm going to run on my devices, or I'm going to run them in kind of an edge context. Like, so there's a whole bunch of edge infrastructure that T-Mobile's deployed, including now edge in a Starlink satellite, which is a new kind of thought about, that's actually it's the edge of space, but it's the edge of your network as well. But you can put models in those edge devices, right? You can put a model in an edge router, and then it's closer, and you can take NVIDIA GPUs or an NVIDIA cluster and put that into the large scale edge infrastructure that T-Mobile's deployed. And you can get kind of lower latency, faster response, lower cost. All of those things kind of come together. And I can use that for any kind of an application. Sales reps going around, you know, using Salesforce or other things and having their local laptops do natural language processing in real time about a sales meeting that they're in the middle of, right? Customer is there, you're there, you've got your laptop open, things are happening. It's happening over the internet, over the network, and using this kind of AI. So it's just connectivity, models, AI, hardware advancements, the local PC, all together turns into a really interesting value prop.
John, I love that you just mentioned some examples too, because I can see this edge LM solution being used in retail, in manufacturing, in financial services. It seems like there's a ton of places that no one's ever thought about because the capability hasn't been there. And now all of a sudden, between the technology platform, the software platform, the communications platform, and an ability for your team, for example, to pull everything together and say, hey, we can be providing information at the snap of the fingers in ways that we've never been able to analyze before is huge.
Yeah, and I'll give you another example. Here's an interesting one. One of the biggest use cases for connected laptops is field services, right? So fleets of people that are running around doing something. They're fixing wind turbines. They're doing HVAC repairs on commercial and residential buildings. Whatever it is that they're doing, field service. There's you see it everywhere. There's trucks going all down the street all the time from all these companies, T-Mobile and the network providers and Comcast and Verizon. Everybody's got field service teams, right? Now, one of the I'll say failed or underperforming use cases of augmented reality was this concept of that I can walk up to, I can put on my glasses and look inside the chassis of an engine or a John Deere tractor, and I'll be able to pull up everything that I need to be able to make that repair. Well, that's not really panned out, and it's really expensive. These glasses and all that kind of stuff doesn't work. But imagine if I can take a picture of my phone and use image recognition models that are available in AI running locally. And then it says, what is this part and what's the repair parameter? And by the way, look at this chip here. Is this going to impact performance? Whatever that is, right? Whatever it is that you do as a field service technician. And then being able to have that intelligence right there so you can very quickly, it tells you, this is the diagnostic steps that you need to take. If these conditions exist, this is how you make the repair. Right? Because I can recognize the image with the model, and then I can generate out of the manuals. I can generate plain language in your local language, English, Polish, whatever it is. That here's the steps that you need to take, and for that to work, you need a connected device, because some of that stuff is going to be like, I can recognize the image, but I need to go back to the core repository that's sitting in a cloud server somewhere. And I need to then have, I'm not going to copy down my whole library of tens of thousands of documents to every laptop. So I need the connection, right? So that use case is that hybrid use case on the edge, in the core, with high connectivity and modern devices. That's the killer use case right here.
And John, I love that you brought that up because now we're gonna put some pressure on Josh for a minute. Josh, so that's what we want to do. We want to make life easier. We want to make businesses more profitable. We want to be out there giving the customer experience that customers want. With Windows 10 approaching its end of life on October 14th, 2025, so we're talking less than a year from now, what key features of Windows 11 should Blue Mantis customers be excited about, especially regarding 5G connectivity, AI, and how is Blue Mantis supporting this transition? Because this seems like a huge undertaking for organizations. Is it as big as I'm thinking?
No, it's probably bigger. I think I'm gonna give you two answers, right? I think we probably have a blend of technologists and leadership as well. So, I think there's two pieces. Over my career, I've seen opinion ebb and flow between where compute should live, right? Should it be centralized in a data center and the endpoints become thin clients and we centralize everything and that didn't quite work out, so we're going to go back to endpoints, and then said, well, again, we lose some security there. Things start to get complicated. So we've seen this ebb and flow between powerful endpoints, decentralized compute, decentralized storage. We've seen moves in and out of that, back to, again, centralized compute. Everything's happening in one place, and the clients become less important. I'm really excited for Windows 11 because I think it really finds a Goldilocks approach to provide solving solutions locally that makes sense to be solved locally, and relying on ubiquitous connectivity, relying on that 5G connectivity anywhere, supported by Starlink, supported by these new low latencies and high bandwidth to solve problems where they make sense. Um, so, whenever we talk about specific feature sets, I'm really excited about some of the security implications there. Windows Hello for Business is going to be huge. Now, if you're not familiar, think about what password managers have offered for several years now, right? The ability to store ultra complex passwords for all of your apps and services behind, just a master password. Imagine if instead of a master password, just plain text, you could protect those credentials behind a thumbprint, behind facial recognition on a local on device hardware based solution that's natively tamper resistant. That's part of the TPM chips that are a requirement for Windows 11 adoption. We're seeing some of our smaller, more innovative customers start to think about a passwordless future. Now, that term for any of the nerds in the room is a little bit of a misnomer. There'll always be passwords, but a world where users don't have to remember and manage these, and they can be stored on a device, again, on a hardware-based solution. But then we add 5G in to provide connectivity, so we can store credentials and authentication and user attestation on a local on-device piece of hardware, but still be able to use that to access all of the great data sets, the great applications that we're seeing move more and more into cloud workloads. And second, and I think this sort of supports that idea as well, really excited to talk with our customers about how tightly integrated Windows 11 is with the Microsoft security ecosystem. Microsoft's made a really compelling case for zero trust, and it intersects with this need for 5G connectivity in really interesting ways, right? Allowing access to sensitive apps, allowing authentication decisions, not just based on passwords and maybe multi-factor authentication, as most organizations have adopted already, but taking in signals from the network, right? The geographic location of that access, how users typically engage with data with applications, and how this authentication attempt might be different from those. And now, more than ever, based on device health. Again, we're talking about solving problems where it makes sense to solve them. Central versus local is starting to blur, and 5G is such an incredible component of making that possible. Is your Windows 11 PC patched to the level that we would expect? So we can take all of this data in real time from virtually anywhere to make better authentication decisions. And that's the definition of 5G. If you look at, the definition of zero trust. If you look at any of the maturity models around zero trust, you're going to see that there are these 5 pillars, right? There's all these technology stacks that we need to be thinking about. But the Cadillac, Rolls Royce, the best of the best, the ultimate outcome is not to have a great network stack and to also have a great data stack, but they're two separate things. The ultimate answer, the ultimate step of maturity is, can we take signals from all of those pillars and make better security decisions, better authentication, go no go decisions based on those? And again, let's solve problems where they make sense.
Well, I think that's a good point. So let's talk about solving problems where they make sense. John, could you explain how AI, and in particular Microsoft Copilot, is being integrated into Microsoft 11, Windows 11 business processes?
Yeah, well, so we have to think about Copilot as before we kind of get into the details here, but Copilot is not one thing. It's a kind of a branding concept across a whole bunch of stuff that Microsoft's doing. So there's a Windows Copilot, there's 365 Copilot for Microsoft 365. There's Copilots in every product. And all Copilot means is that I'm augmenting the experience with generative AI. Right. That's kind of generally what it means, is that something's happening. Generative AI is going to help me do it. So can it help me use my laptop better? Can I have voice control over different applications? You know, at some point, it'll probably include the ability for the AI to take control of certain functions on your laptop and actually do them on your behalf. Like, hey, take this PowerPoint and reformat it as a XYZ, and it'll actually just do it, right? But we're not there yet. So Copilot in Windows is still an evolving kind of concept. There's, I'll say some start and stops around, kind of trapping all of your screen actions and all of that, and the privacy issues around that. But I think they're kind of restarted that and coming out with it. But it's things like, how do I do this, right? Or how do I fix that, right? You go to help in Windows, you go to help in any operating system, and sometimes you get the right answer. But instead of help and then finding and searching through the list of all the things that come back with help topics, describe your problem, say how to fix it. That's what you do with Copilot. So, describe your problem, like, this is what's going on. How do I fix that? And it'll give you much, much more precise and targeted feedback. So it shows up in Bing search. So, when I'm using the search key in Windows on the laptop, and I'm asking for a web search to be performed, or I'm asking for information that goes to the web search, I get it back with generative AI summaries and links and all of that in Copilot. So it's kind of integrating all that together on the laptop. You've got Office running on the laptop. You've got the Windows operating system Copilot that helps you, kind of figure out how to use your operating system better and deal with issues. So it's all over the place. And then obviously the key use case is, I'm searching for something, or I want to get an answer to something, and it's kind of like it's effectively the Bing search, or copilot.microsoft.com, but kind of embedded and wrapped up into your laptop to give you that search plus generative AI plus general knowledge that's in the models response. Pretty strong, very interesting. That is kind of the direction that we're heading. Again, putting stuff where it's part of the whole experience. It's not like a separate app all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of going to show up more and more as we move forward. It's still very early. I will say this: Microsoft doesn't, nor does anybody else, know what the future user experience is actually going to look like. It's just what we have today. It's moving so fast, and people are innovating so fast that Microsoft is, they're doing their innovations, and they're also seeing what other people are coming out with. And, honestly, we don't really know all of the places, but right now it's a pretty good experience. You get some value out of it, and it's interesting.
Thanks, John.
I was just going to say, Rob, if you don't mind, John brings up a really interesting point where organizations, they don't know, they're testing the water. It's so nascent. But that being said, Gartner just came out with a stat that 51% of laptops that will ship next year will be AI powered. So there's clearly a lot of interest. And to John's earlier point, I think it's very important for those who are listening today, when they're contemplating their next purchase or their next fleet of laptop acquisitions, to really think about the end user experience that they want to impart on their employee. And now is a really good time to maybe test the waters, to John's point. Not the whole organization maybe needs a 5G or an AI embedded laptop, but there are certain pockets or certain users. And that's what we're seeing, Rob, at the moment with partners and customers is there's a lot of pilots happening at larger organizations where they're wanting to see what the business value will actually be. But intrinsically, if those laptops are connected, they have access to the network, then they're always on, and there's a lot more reliability in terms of access to the data. Because at the end of the day, that's the heart of it. And I'm going to share a slide, if you don't mind, real quick on a program that we have active with Blue Mantis and T-Mobile. So hopefully you can see that slide. Last a couple of weeks ago at Cloudscape, it was very apparent to us in the conversations that we were having that many of your customers are in the buying phase right now. They're contemplating, what should I acquire in my next fleet of laptop purchases? And so what we've tried to do, we've partnered with some of the major OEMs. You can see Lenovo, Microsoft, HP, Dell. We also have Zebra tablets, which we've recently added Windows-based tablets to. Put together a program creatively called the Connected Laptop Program, whereby the customer now has the opportunity, when they're contemplating the acquisition of those laptops, to work through Blue Mantis to not only think about an AI connected laptop, but also to subscribe to 5G. And as you can see on the left side here, there are numerous features and functions that are included in these plans. If the user employs a plan of $35, $40, or $50 a month, so that's a T-Mobile rate plan, they're going to get a hefty discount at the time of purchase. So for example, at $35, they'll get a subsidy that's $250. And this becomes very important because as a buyer, if you're thinking about, is the cost of that connectivity worth it? It's obviously an extra cost that I have to factor versus say Wi-Fi, which is no cost. But if you think about it, Wi-Fi as a standard was never designed for mobility. Whereas if you've got a mobile workforce, or if you've got staff that are meeting ad hoc, let's say, for example, in a hospital, those doctors, nurses, clinicians, and support staff, they're not always meeting in a scheduled meeting. More often than not, it's a meeting that's happening in on the go, or someone's in the hallway. They're triaging on the fly. And therefore, they need that secure, reliable, always-on connectivity. And that's why this program was built. The subsidies have been designed specifically to, what I would say, take the sting out of that buy. And the sting right now is the additional cost of a 5G radio. It's typically in and around $150 for the additional component in a laptop. So if you could remove that barrier at the time of purchase, well, I think it gives great benefit. On the left there too, you can see a feature or a connectivity protocol called T-SIM Secure. This is very interesting in the sense that when we were talking about T-Mobile doing interesting things, Rob, T-Mobile have partnered with Versa to essentially embed Versa's Secure Access Services Edge portfolio into their network, such that when we're talking about security and we're talking about mobility, what's the weakest link? It's typically the employee in an organization. And by embedding the security into the network with this feature that requires no additional software, it's essentially running in the network. If you have a SIM card that identifies you as subscribed to this protocol, your data from that laptop will route from that laptop directly through T-Mobile's network into the corporate network, never touching the internet. So that's very important in today, where we see ongoing, cyber attack and breaches, especially as John was saying, there's a greater reliability on data that's or applications that are cloud-based. And let's be honest, that's the way the entire industry has been going for a long time. A lot more of those services are running in a third-party cloud. So wanting to isolate and protect the endpoint is very important. And if you can embed that into the network, which T-Mobile have, and abstract arguably that responsibility for the end user, it goes a long way.
No, I think that makes sense. I love the fact that you're here talking about T-Mobile and connectivity and promoting laptops. So all of our salespeople appreciate that, Carl. But John, you said something that was really insightful too, which was in regards to Copilot, in regards to users and trying to get them to adopt and see where and how things are going to be used. And when we think about laptops for a quick second, I want to derail here. When we think about laptops, it's funny, if we are in this period of time where you're considering buying, remember it's a 3 to 5 year purchase, right? It's not a I'm going to buy a nice laptop and then throw it away in a year because now I understand where AI is. I want to buy a device that is going to stick with the employees and that they're going to be comfortable with so that they can adopt. And you want them to adopt as employees you being comfortable and understanding how to best utilize AI now, because the ability to capitalize on AI 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now will be that much broader as more and more use cases and tools come out to be able to lean into them. So, Josh, that leads me to you. How is Blue Mantis ensuring customers can fully utilize these AI capabilities across their device ecosystem?
Yeah, great question. And Carl, John, you guys, I think, nailed it, right? There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around, where should customers start with AI adoption? I'll tell you an interesting story. Blue Mantis is a huge Microsoft partnership. We consume funding, we consume all sorts of Microsoft programs. And typically, when Microsoft rolls out a new technology, the way that they incent us as partners is to go out and help customers with assessments, help them figure out which wrenches to turn, and then fund turning the wrench. But Copilot was fundamentally very different. Microsoft identified early on that before you touched anything, before you clicked the single button, before you bought the first license, that their customers were struggling with what does adoption look like? I think we all sort of agreed and aligned on there's probably a user class or a group of users or a group of devices that would benefit from these technologies. A lot of our customers are struggling to know which are they, where does that investment make sense. So day to day, we're working to help customers define that adoption strategy, and it's a handful of outcomes. First and foremost, does your organization have policies that address the concerns that AI raises? Do you have an acceptable use policy that defines, do your users understand that when they use AI, they're responsible for how that data is used? If AI gives a false response, something that's inaccurate, the user is responsible for how that's used in customer company materials. The other concerns, and this is a really common one, they tend to be around data governance, right? If we turn AI on for this group, that group, for everyone, what kind of information is going to surface? There are lots of organizations today that have really rich data sets in the Microsoft ecosystem, in Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, but governance maybe has been lacking, and so they've gotten by way of security through obscurity. We're not really sure what data is out there, but no one's found anything terribly detrimental, so we're probably okay. Security through obscurity dies as soon as we turn on an AI platform that can consume all of that data and feed it back to a user as they ask. So, where we're starting are what are your AI use cases, right? Microsoft has these workshops that Blue Mantis comes in and helps our customers with. What are those use cases? Are there things that we should focus on from a business process standpoint? Should we focus on general user efficiency of knowledge workers? Again, maybe that's a particular department, maybe that's accounting, maybe that's finance. But defining those and those decisions drive additional questions. If we're going to adopt Copilot for HR, what does that look like? What kind of training do we need to get the HR team prompt engineering? Should we build early adopter communities so that those users can share prompts and input? So these adoption strategy motions, they're really the first steps for most organizations. Can we define a real ROI for these kind of investments? And again, is that something around a specific business process? Do we build a custom copilot Do we build something with AITP, these incredible curated knowledge-based chatbots, right? Do we look at general efficiency of a group of users? And then, what does the adoption mechanism look like for those users? So, at the end of the day, oh, please.
No, I think I want to kind of tie a few things together here, which is like Carl said, half of laptops that ship next year or some whatever the number was is will be AI enabled. And the challenge that we have is that, and this is from our experience with many clients, right? So that people don't know how to use this stuff. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know where it's going to be valuable for them. They don't understand it. And what happens with, not to knock Microsoft, but Microsoft puts out kind of training that's fairly broad. But you have to get down to enablement at the user and task level, right? How do I use AI in this task, and what's the right architecture for me to deploy that? And where might having an AI-enabled laptop that can run local models, that have a model running in the operating system that can do things locally, where is that relevant? I think half those laptops, people are going to get them, and they're not going to be sure why or what they're getting out of the AI that's on board without some incremental help. So, as Josh pointed out, like there's a lot of steps there, but there's also a lot of value in you just got to move forward, right? So what we don't want to have people do is sit there and spend the next year going, geez, I wonder how I'm going to use this, and I better put a whole bunch of policies in place, and I better get my data house in order, which, by the way, we've been doing that for 20 years. And all of these things is just delay. And, your competitors out there, to you people I'm talking to in the audience, your competitors, some of them are in the same boat that you are, but some of them are moving forward. And what's happening is those guys that are moving forward are going to start to take, advantage of this in a way that's going to disadvantage you. And so we're big proponents of it. Almost doesn't matter the answers to what am I going to do with it and what's going to be my ROI on this specific thing. It's where do I just get started? Let me just get started with something and get some experience. And training and enablement and kind of user adoption and change management is the absolutely black and white difference between successful adoption and mediocre adoption. And too many companies just take the tools, like they take Copilot or take something else, and they give it to their users. And then they go, well, why isn't anybody using it? Well, nobody's using it, or people aren't using it enough because they've never been trained where to apply this technology in their day. And so you don't think about use case like, what's my use case for a word processor? Right? You just start using the word processor. Well, we need to teach people how to do this.
Well, I just want to say, I love this, John. I love that you brought this up. I think that the training piece is really good, because organizations often forget about training. The assumption is, hey, you're here, you know how to use the tools. But along those lines, I absolutely, for our audience, we already know. We have organizations that we're working with, that we know of, that we see out in the public domain, that have basically said, similar to when cloud became popular, they chose to lean into the cloud environment first. We're going AI first. We're seeing organizations say, whether it be in their sales departments, in their accounting departments, in their customer service departments, or whatever, we're leaning heavily into AI. And if you're a small startup business, it is incredibly beneficial to lean into the resource known as collectively AI. Because you're right, I cringe when I talk about AI, because AI is so many different things based on where and how you're applying it. It's like the word cool. But that being said, I think this is a really important point, and I want to jump in here, because I'd love to share some real world applications and examples that our audience can be thinking about, and understand, audience, right? We're going to give some examples, but if we're talking about I don't know, a restaurant as an example, it doesn't mean you can't use it at a baseball stadium. It doesn't mean that you can't use it in a movie theater. We're just trying to share some. So listen broadly to some of these examples. Carl, why don't you start? And maybe, I don't know if you have any ideas or thoughts. You've talked about hospital quite a bit, but maybe you have another.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the healthcare just because it is one of the biggest adopters that we're seeing. And I wanted to follow what Josh and John just said. You know, clearly we're talking a lot about technology here, but at the end of the day, we never start the conversation that way because that's just wrong. What you really want to do is understand what the business outcomes, what are the drivers, what are the aspirations of that organization, and what are the challenges that they're facing today. And what we're seeing overwhelmingly in healthcare, and I spend a lot of time talking to CIOs, is to your point, Rob, it fundamentally has to begin with education. Many organizations aren't contemplating the benefits that cellular can actually offer for their organizations, or unfortunately, they've had a poor experience because prior to the other Gs, as we discussed, were somewhat limiting in their capabilities. They're excellent, obviously, for mobile phones, but when you get into the enterprise and you're talking about applications, you're talking about collaboration and communication. You're talking about real-time sharing. You're talking about taking maybe the services within the four walls and now offering them beyond the four walls. And to do that, at its fundamental core, what you need is a reliable, ubiquitous, secure network, right? So these are the things we go in, we listen, we understand, we look at the way things are being done today, whether that's in manufacturing or retail. And what are the impediments to providing the customer with a better experience, or the patient with a better outcome, or the staff with a better outcome, or better work condition environment? And invariably, when you boil it down, it becomes increasingly important to look at the connectivity, the reliability of that connectivity, the responsiveness of that connectivity, the latency. And we find many organizations and many users have created workarounds to these problems because they didn't think there was a viable alternative to the Wi-Fi infrastructure that they have. And going to the TCO, many IT people that we talk to, they're very familiar, obviously, with Wi-Fi because that's basically in their domain. The cellular providers, the carriers, obviously, they bring that network. And so those two worlds have never really had the opportunity to really be married until now. Now we're starting to employ hybrid networks where it's not one versus the other. It's truly employ a network, a connectivity that is the best connectivity for that particular application, workload, or outcome that you're trying to effectuate. But to do that, you need education. You need partners like Blue Mantis who have domain level expertise and also have that business acumen. They understand what the customer's challenges are and marry that arguably with a carrier like T-Mobile who bring that level of expertise to the engagement such that you can really truly meet in the middle and deliver an outcome that will essentially address the challenges that that organization has. And I think that's very important, right? So abstract the technology, abstract the 5G conversation, listen to what the customer has from business challenges, understand their workflow. That's really important. And what kind of impediments they have today. What are those workarounds that they've been so creative at employing? And how do you basically employ something better for them, such that you're giving them a platform that will not only solve their challenges for today, but arguably lay the foundation for the future. And that's what we're seeing to a large extent what 5G offers, especially in broader enterprises where the network today is saturated. There's more and more devices hitting that network. There's more and more demands on that network. Data, if you look at the applications and the profile of applications, those workloads have become much bigger, much broader, and more demanding on the network. The networks are becoming saturated. So enabling that organization to understand that there is a viable alternative. It's not one versus the other. Let us come in, consult, meet with you, and then architect something that is custom designed, I would argue, for that organization's needs.
No, you're right, Carl. You're right, and I think people don't realize. I've seen the T-Mobile fixed wireless solution in retail, in banking. I've seen it in supply chain logistics. We've been bringing it into manufacturing. There's lots of places. Josh, what about you? Where do you see? Where are you seeing the use of solutions, AI and Windows 11, and what use cases would you say are quick wins or should be considered or evaluated by the audience?
Yeah, Fitzy, I think the simple answer is places where you have rich data, but making that data actionable quickly is a challenge. I'll give you a quick example. I know we're coming up on time here. I have a handful of clients who all work in some form of a concierge service. Think the kind of service you might get if you became a card holder of a very prestigious credit card, place you'd call to make reservations, book tickets, so on and so forth. For years, these organizations have collected all sorts of data about their members, right? Favorite foods, favorite restaurants, children's birth dates, anniversaries, where they want to travel, bucket list, right? All sorts of data. And the problem with it is that data is incredibly unique, and it takes time for a concierge agent to go through that and then to make it pertinent to whatever that day's call is on in a timely manner and still make that a conversational interaction. So imagine if all of that data that already exists were integrated with a contact center functionality that's transcribing the call. The concierge agent could receive real-time recommendations from a custom chatbot, right? So imagine, right, a one-off call from a member to book opera tickets in Paris might suddenly be filled with all sorts of valuable context for the business. It's that member's anniversary, right? Paris is a bucket list vacation. The agent should book aisle tickets because of a preference for seating, recommend a particular restaurant down the road, right? Where can we make the data we already have more valuable, more quickly accessible?
Nice. And I appreciate that. I think that's a great real world example. John, AI technology partners, are you able to collaborate and build out that LLM or that private LM or SLM that they can use? Where are you seeing some use cases that organizations should actively be thinking, aggressively even be thinking about?
First off, what we do deliver is solutions for clients using this technology on the Microsoft stack to be able to solve specific and very detailed business problems. And we look at it in two ways. Is that we think that most organizations should have what I'll call foundational intelligence, which is that everybody in the organization should have access to some form of generative AI capability. And we can deploy that for you securely in an environment that is completely controlled and only you have access to the data. It's not going out to a SaaS application where you're not sure where the data is going. So that's one. The second is, the screen just changed here. Okay. The second one, the second point here is the what I'll call functional intelligence, where we start to deploy it into different functions. Sales, the big use cases where we really want to start with a lot of people's sales, marketing, customer operations, and engineering. Those are the core functions where you're going to see a lot of it. So the short answer is we can pull it all together for you. We can help you deliver it, and we can also enable your team to use it.
No, this is fantastic. Gentlemen, I really appreciate the time today. I believe that the audience should at least be able to find some things of use in this webinar. And quite frankly, most of this webinar is going to be relevant to them in different ways, which is excellent. We have the connected laptop campaign. We have the discussions from Cloudscape, right, that are available. If there's a QR code on the slide linking to can we put the slide up? To the campaign. So if you have questions, absolutely, please reach out to any one of us so that we can help point you in the right direction, answer questions, or support you as you go on this journey. The one thing that I will say beyond thank you for joining us today is please consider starting this journey now, as Windows 10 is going to become end of life sooner than you can imagine, less than a year from now, and there's a lot of opportunity for businesses that lean into AI. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.